The human capacity for evil is not distributed as we might expect. Monsters not born fully formed, emerging from the womb with malice in their hearts and cruelty in their souls. Instead, they develop from the same raw material as saints and heroes, ordinary people with ordinary moral compasses who somehow lose their way. This transformation represents one of the most disturbing aspects of human nature, that the line between good and evil runs not between different types of people, but through the middle of every human heart. The transformation from decent human being to moral monster is neither sudden nor inevitable, but it follows predictable patterns that reveal the fragility of human goodness. Understanding these patterns is crucial not only for comprehending historical atrocities, but for recognizing the warning signs in our own lives and societies. The question is not whether good people can become monsters, but rather what conditions make this transformation possible and how we might prevent it. The gradual erosion of moral boundaries. The path from goodness to monstrosity rarely begins with a dramatic leap into darkness. Instead, it typically starts with small compromises, minor ethical violations that seem harmless in isolation. Each transgression makes the next one easier to justify, creating a slippery slope where moral boundaries gradually erode until they disappear entirely. Consider how professionals in various fields slowly abandon their ethical standards. A doctor might initially bend a rule slightly to help a patient, then gradually find themselves cutting more corners until they're engaging in outright malpractice. A police officer might overlook minor infractions from fellow officers, eventually becoming complicit in serious corruption. Each step seems reasonable in context, yet collectively they lead to a destination that would have horrified the person's former self. This process works because humans are remarkably adept at rationalization. We possess an almost unlimited capacity to justify our actions after the fact, especially when those actions align with our immediate interests or desires. What begins as a temporary exception becomes a new normal, and what once seemed unthinkable becomes routine. The corporate executive who starts by slightly inflating quarterly reports can end up orchestrating massive fraud schemes, always finding reasons why each step was necessary or justified. The power of gradual change lies in its invisibility to the person experiencing it. Unlike dramatic transformations that would trigger alarm bells, incremental shifts feel natural and manageable. By the time the cumulative effect becomes apparent, the individual has already travelled far from their original moral position, often without realising the extent of their journey. The authority factor. One of the most powerful forces in human transformation is the presence of authority figures who provide permission or encouragement for immoral behaviour. People who would never consider harming others on their own initiative can become capable of extreme cruelty when directed by someone they perceive as legitimate authority. Stanley Milgram's famous experiments demonstrated this principle dramatically, showing that ordinary people would administer what they believed were dangerous electric shocks to strangers simply because an authority figure told them to continue. The participants weren't sadists or psychopaths. They were regular citizens who found themselves trapped between their moral instincts and their learned deference to authority. This dynamic plays out on a massive scale in organized atrocities. Soldiers commit war crimes not because they're inherently evil, but because their commanders create an environment where such acts become normalized or even expected. The authority structure provides both permission and cover, allowing individuals to suspend their personal moral judgment and defer to the system's demands. The effectiveness of authority in transforming behaviour stems from several factors. First, it diffuses personal responsibility, allowing individuals to believe they're merely following orders rather than making independent moral choices. Second, it provides social validation, suggesting that the behaviour must be acceptable if it's being sanctioned by legitimate leaders. Third, it creates consequences for non-compliance, making resistance seem costly or dangerous. Professional environments often amplify this effect through hierarchical structures that reward obedience and punish dissent. Employees learn to suppress their moral concerns in favour of organisational goals, gradually becoming desensitized to practices they would have found objectionable as outsiders. The combination of career advancement opportunities and fear of professional consequences creates powerful incentives to conform to authority expectations, even when those expectations conflict with personal values. Group dynamics and social pressure. Humans are fundamentally social creatures, and our behaviour is profoundly influenced by the groups we belong to. The desire to fit in, gain acceptance, and maintain social standing can override individual moral convictions, leading good people to participate in or condone terrible acts. Group dynamics create their own momentum, where collective behaviour becomes divorced from individual conscience. In group settings, responsibility becomes diffused among members, making it easier for each person to minimise their individual culpability. The bystander effect illustrates this phenomenon on a small scale, where people fail to help others in distress because they assume someone else will take action. On a larger scale, entire populations can become complicit in atrocities through similar mechanisms of diffuse responsibility. Conformity pressure within groups can be overwhelming, especially when non-compliance threatens social belonging. People who might privately object to group actions often remain silent rather than risk exclusion or retaliation. This silence is interpreted by others as tacit approval, creating a false consensus that reinforces the group's destructive direction. The process of group polarization makes these dynamics even more dangerous. Groups tend to make more extreme decisions than individuals would make alone, as members encourage each other to take increasingly radical positions. What begins as mild prejudice can escalate into violent hatred through the echo chamber effect of like-minded individuals reinforcing each other's worst impulses. Social media has amplified these dynamics in unprecedented ways, creating virtual groups where extreme views can spread rapidly and gain apparent legitimacy through numerical support. The anonymity and distance provided by digital platforms can further erode moral restraints, allowing people to engage in behaviour online that they would never consider in face-to-face interactions. Dehumanization and moral disengagement. Perhaps the most crucial factor in transforming good people into monsters is the process of dehumanization, where victims are stripped of their human qualities and redefined as something less worthy of moral consideration. This cognitive transformation makes it possible for otherwise compassionate individuals to inflict terrible suffering without experiencing normal empathetic responses. Dehumanization operates through language, imagery, and conceptual frameworks that redefine the target group as fundamentally different from and inferior to the perpetrator's group. Victims become animals, parasites, infections, or threats that need to be eliminated for the good of society. This linguistic transformation isn't mere rhetoric. It actually changes how perpetrators perceive and relate to their victims. The effectiveness of dehumanization lies in its ability to bypass normal moral inhibitions. Humans have evolved strong prohibitions against harming other humans But these same prohibitions don't apply to threats, pests, or objects. By cognitively recategorizing victims, perpetrators can engage in harmful behavior while maintaining their self-image as moral people who are simply doing what's necessary. Moral disengagement works alongside dehumanization to neutralize ethical concerns. Albert Bandura identified several mechanisms people use to disengage their moral standards. Moral justification, portraying harmful acts as serving worthy purposes; euphemistic labeling, using sanitized language to describe destructive actions; advantageous comparison, comparing current actions favorably to worse alternatives; displacement of responsibility, attributing actions to external pressures; diffusion of responsibility, spreading accountability across many people; distortion of consequences, minimizing or ignoring harm; and dehumanization of victims. These mechanisms allow people to maintain their moral self-concept while engaging in increasingly harmful behavior. A person can participate in systematic oppression while genuinely believing they're protecting society from dangerous elements. They can inflict suffering while convincing themselves they're preventing greater harm. The human capacity for self-deception in service of moral disengagement is virtually limitless. Environmental and systemic pressures. The environments we inhabit shape our behavior in profound ways, often without our conscious awareness. Toxic systems can corrupt even well-intentioned individuals by creating incentive structures that reward harmful behavior and punish ethical choices. Consider the financial industry's role in various economic crises. Many of the individuals involved in creating subprime mortgage scandals or engaging in predatory lending practices weren't inherently greedy or malicious. However, they operated within systems that rewarded short-term profits while externalizing long-term costs. Performance bonuses, promotion criteria, and competitive pressures created environments where ethical behavior became economically disadvantageous. Similarly, healthcare systems that prioritize efficiency and cost-cutting over patient care can gradually erode the ethical foundations of medical practice. Doctors and nurses who entered their professions to help people can find themselves making decisions based on financial considerations rather than patient welfare, not because they've become bad people, but because the system's incentives have shifted their priorities. Institutional cultures play a crucial role in shaping individual behavior. Organizations develop informal norms and expectations that can override formal ethical guidelines. New employees learn how things really work through observation and socialization, often adopting practices they would have questioned as the outsiders. Over time, these practices become normalized and unquestioned, creating institutional momentum that's difficult to resist. The physical environment itself can influence moral behavior. Broken windows theory suggests that visible signs of disorder and neglect can encourage further deterioration, including moral decline. Environments that appear lawless or uncared for can subtly communicate that normal rules don't apply, making it easier for people to engage in behavior they would avoid in more ordered settings. Economic pressures and social instability create additional environmental factors that can push good people toward harmful actions. When people fear for their survival or their family's welfare, they may compromise their values in ways they never thought possible. Desperation can make previously unthinkable options seem reasonable or necessary. The role of ideology and belief systems. Ideological frameworks provide powerful tools for transforming moral sensibilities, offering comprehensive worldviews that can justify virtually any action in service of higher goals. Good people can become monsters when they become convinced that their cause is so important that normal moral rules don't apply. Revolutionary movements throughout history have attracted genuinely idealistic individuals who believed they were working to create a better world. Many of these same individuals later participated in purges, executions, and other atrocities, not because they had abandoned their idealism, but because their ideological framework had redefined such actions as necessary sacrifices for the greater good. Religious extremism operates through similar mechanisms, taking genuine spiritual impulses and channeling them toward destructive ends. People who sincerely believe they're serving divine purposes can justify almost any action, from personal cruelty to mass violence. The same psychological mechanisms that drive charitable works and personal sacrifice can be redirected toward persecution and destruction. Political ideologies can be equally transformative, providing frameworks that divide the world into good and evil, us and them, progressive and reactionary. These binary thinking patterns make it easier to dehumanize opponents and justify harsh measures against them. The more totalizing the ideology, the more completely it can override individual moral judgment. The danger of ideological thinking lies not in having beliefs, but in allowing those beliefs to become so central to identity that questioning them becomes psychologically impossible. When ideology becomes fused with self-concept, challenges to the belief system feel like personal attacks, creating powerful psychological incentives to defend the ideology regardless of evidence or moral considerations. Modern conspiracy theories demonstrate how ideological frameworks can transform ordinary people into agents of harm. Individuals who begin with legitimate concerns about government overreach or corporate power can gradually adopt increasingly extreme worldviews that justify violence against perceived enemies. The step-by-step process of ideological radicalization can lead decent people to support or participate in terrorist activities while maintaining their self-image as patriots or freedom fighters. The corruption of good intentions. One of the most tragic aspects of human transformation is how good intentions can become corrupted through the very pursuit of worthy goals. People who genuinely want to help others or improve society can gradually adopt harmful methods in service of their noble aims, eventually becoming indistinguishable from those they originally opposed. The healthcare professional who begins by wanting to heal the sick might gradually compromise their standards in pursuit of research breakthroughs, eventually conducting unethical experiments on vulnerable populations. The social reformer who starts by advocating for justice might gradually embrace more extreme measures, eventually supporting violence against those who resist change. The parent who begins by wanting to protect their children might gradually become controlling and abusive in their efforts to ensure their safety. This corruption occurs because the pursuit of good outcomes can create a results-oriented mindset that gradually devalues the means used to achieve those results. Each compromise seems justified by the ultimate goal, and each success reinforces the belief that the ends justify the means. Over time, the original good intentions become mere justifications for increasingly questionable actions. The phenomenon is particularly visible in helping professions, where the desire to serve others can gradually transform into paternalistic control. Social workers, teachers, doctors, and therapists who begin with genuine compassion can gradually develop God complexes, believing they know what's best for others regardless of those people's own wishes or values. Their good intentions shield them from recognizing the harm they cause, as they interpret resistance or negative outcomes as evidence of others' ignorance rather than signs of their own overreach. Organizational mission creep demonstrates this pattern on an institutional level. Non-profit organizations founded to address specific problems can gradually expand their scope and methods, eventually engaging in activities that contradict their original values. The desire to maintain relevance and funding can drive organizations to adopt increasingly aggressive tactics or to redefine their mission in ways that justify questionable behavior. The fragility of goodness. The transformation of good people into monsters reveals the profound fragility of human morality. Our capacity for ethical behavior depends on maintaining favorable conditions that support our better angels while restraining our darker impulses. When these conditions break down, through gradual erosion, authoritarian pressure, toxic group dynamics, dehumanizing ideologies, or environmental stresses, even the most well-intentioned individuals can find themselves committing acts they would have found unthinkable. This understanding should inspire both humility and vigilance. Humility because it reminds us that we are all vulnerable to moral corruption under the right circumstances. The distance between good person and monster may be shorter than we like to believe, traversed not through dramatic moral collapses, but through incremental compromises and subtle psychological manipulations. None of us can claim immunity from the forces that have transformed others throughout history. Vigilance because recognizing these patterns gives us the power to resist them. By understanding how good people become monsters, we can better identify the warning signs in our own lives and societies. We can create systems and structures that support ethical behavior rather than undermining it. We can resist the gradual erosion of our moral boundaries and maintain our capacity for moral courage even under pressure. The story of human moral transformation is ultimately a story about the importance of conscious choice and active resistance to corrupting influences. Goodness is not a fixed trait, but an ongoing practice that requires constant attention and renewal. By acknowledging our vulnerability to moral corruption, we can work more effectively to maintain our humanity and prevent the conditions that transform ordinary people into agents of extraordinary harm. Perhaps most importantly, we must cultivate moral courage, the strength to stand against corrupting pressures even when it costs us personally. This means speaking up when we witness ethical violations, refusing to participate in systems that reward harmful behavior, and maintaining our principles even under intense pressure. It requires building support networks of like-minded individuals who can provide accountability and encouragement when our resolve weakens. The monsters among us were once good people, but they need not remain monsters forever. Just as goodness can be corrupted, it can also be recovered through recognition, repentance, and the hard work of moral reconstruction. Understanding the mechanisms of moral transformation offers hope not only for prevention, but also for redemption, reminding us that the human capacity for both good and evil makes our choices all the more significant. The question we must ask ourselves is not whether we are capable of becoming monsters. We all are. Instead, we must ask what we will do with this knowledge. Will we use it to become more vigilant guardians of our own integrity? Will we create institutions and cultures that nurture our better angels, rather than feeding our darker impulses? Will we have the courage to intervene when we see others beginning their descent into moral darkness? The answers to these questions will determine not only our individual fates, but the character of our society itself. In the end, recognizing our capacity for evil may be the first step toward choosing good,